The Zephyrin University of Xenobiology stood as a monument to academic arrogance, its crystalline spires reaching toward distant stars with the same presumptuous confidence that its faculty displayed when dismissing entire planetary ecosystems as quaint evolutionary experiments. For 3 millennia, this institution had been the galaxy's premier center of learning, where the brightest minds from 17 different species gathered to study the universe's biological wonders. Well, the supposedly worthy ones anyway. The university's reputation rested on a simple premise: advanced civilizations produced advanced life forms, while primitive worlds spawned primitive creatures. It was a beautifully circular logic that had served the academic community well, allowing them to focus their considerable intellects on the truly magnificent specimens from worlds like Xerion Prime, where crystalline beings communicated through harmonic resonance, or the gas giant Thurval, whose atmospheric leviathans could manipulate gravity itself. Earth, naturally, occupied the very bottom of this prestigious hierarchy, the third rock from an unremarkable star in a backwater spiral arm, inhabited by bipedal mammals who had only recently figured out how to split atoms without immediately destroying themselves. Their planet's biology was considered a textbook example of evolutionary stagnation, a world where natural selection had apparently given up halfway through and decided to let random chance take the wheel. Professor Kethvar, a distinguished Nexarian whose tentacled form had graced the university's xenobiology department for the past 2 centuries, surveyed his mixed-species classroom with the weary satisfaction of someone who had explained the same basic concepts to countless generations of students. Today's lesson focused on comparative planetary biology, why some worlds succeed and others merely exist, a course that had become increasingly popular as more species joined the galactic community and needed to understand their place in the cosmic pecking order. Today we examine Earth's insect population, Kethvar announced, his voice carrying the particular tone academics reserved for discussing subjects that bored them to tears. A fascinating study in evolutionary mediocrity, where millions of species have somehow managed to survive despite lacking any remarkable adaptations whatsoever. The classroom erupted in the polite chittering, harmonizing, and electromagnetic fluctuations that passed for laughter among the diverse student body. At the front of the room, a holographic display showed various Earth insects in exaggerated detail, butterflies that looked like animated tissue paper, beetles that resembled poorly designed toys, and spiders that appeared to have been assembled by a committee of beings who had never seen a proper predator. Zixtal, a Vorthan whose crystalline body refracted light in patterns that indicated supreme confidence, raised one of her geometric appendages. "Professor, I fail to understand how such simplistic creatures could have survived for millions of years. Their design principles violate every known rule of efficient biological engineering." "An excellent observation," Kethvar replied, clearly pleased with his students' intellectual superiority. Earth's insects represent what happens when evolution proceeds without proper guidance. They're essentially biological accidents that have persisted through sheer stubborn luck rather than any inherent capability. Quelaine, a Mindari whose telepathic abilities made her the unofficial spokeswoman for her species, projected her thoughts directly into the minds of her classmates. "I've analyzed the neural patterns of Earth's insects through long-range psychic scanning. Their consciousness barely registers above plant-level awareness. They're essentially mobile vegetables with legs." The mental laughter that rippled through the telepathically sensitive students in the room carried undertones of superiority so thick they were practically visible. Only one student remained conspicuously silent during this intellectual feast of mockery. Malik Chen, the lone human exchange student who had somehow managed to qualify for the university's rigorous admission standards. Malik sat in the back row, his unremarkable bipedal form dwarfed by the magnificent alien intelligences surrounding him. His species' recent admission to the galactic community had been something of a controversial decision, with many academics arguing that humans were at least 50,000 years away from being ready for advanced interstellar education. The fact that Earth had managed to produce even one student capable of meeting Zephyrin's standards was considered a statistical anomaly, like finding a functioning computer in a pile of rocks. "Mr. Chen?" Professor Kethvar's voice carried across the classroom, with the patronizing kindness typically reserved for small children and particularly slow-witted pets. Perhaps you'd like to share your unique perspective on your homeworld's insect population? Malik looked up from his notes, where he had been quietly documenting the various ways his classmates had managed to be wrong about literally everything they'd said in the past hour. Well, Professor, I think there might be some misconceptions about Earth insects that could benefit from clarification. Groxeth, a Thugnarian whose armored exoskeleton made him look like a walking tank, produced a sound that his species considered laughter, but which resembled a garbage disposal attempting to process titanium. Misconceptions? The only misconception here is thinking Earth's insects deserve any respect whatsoever. I've seen more sophisticated biological designs in single-celled organisms from the Andromeda Galaxy. The classroom erupted in another wave of polite academic amusement. Malik waited for the noise to die down before continuing, his voice maintaining the carefully neutral tone he had learned to adopt when surrounded by beings who could accidentally vaporize him with their various natural abilities. I understand the perspective, but I think there might be some value in examining Earth insects more closely before reaching final conclusions about their capabilities. Zixtal's crystalline form shimmered with what could generously be called condescension. Mr. Chen, while we appreciate your species' loyalty, the facts speak for themselves. Earth insects lack any form of advanced cognition, sophisticated defensive mechanisms, or evolutionary advantages that would impress anyone with a basic understanding of biological principles. Indeed, Quelline added, her telepathic voice carrying overtones of pity. I've observed their behavior patterns through psychic monitoring, and they display all the strategic thinking of cosmic dust. Their survival mechanisms are so primitive, they barely qualify as instincts. Professor Kethvar nodded approvingly at his student's analysis. You see, Mr. Chen, this is why comparative xenobiology is so important. It helps us understand the vast differences between worlds that have achieved biological excellence and those that have merely persisted. Malik glanced around the classroom, taking in the satisfied expressions of his classmates. The Vorthans looked like living prisms, smugly refracting superiority. The Mindari were practically glowing with telepathic self-satisfaction, and the Thugnarians had assumed the posture their species adopted when they were particularly pleased with their own intellectual prowess. I have a proposal, Malik said, his voice cutting through the ambient academic smugness like a knife through quantum foam. Since there seems to be such certainty about Earth insects' lack of notable characteristics, perhaps we could arrange a practical demonstration? The classroom fell silent. In the galaxy's most prestigious university, practical demonstrations were considered the ultimate academic challenge, reserved for subjects that warranted serious scientific investigation. Suggesting a hands-on study of Earth's insects was like proposing to use a supernova to light a candle. A demonstration? Kethvar's tentacles writhed in what his species considered deep thought. Mr. Chen, while I admire your enthusiasm for your homeworld's biology, I'm not sure Earth insects merit that level of attention. His respect, Professor. Wouldn't a practical demonstration be the most effective way to settle this discussion definitively? If Earth insects are as unremarkable as everyone believes, then observing them directly should provide conclusive evidence of their limitations. Roxeth's armor plate rattled with amusement. I support this proposal enthusiastically. Watching Earth's mighty insects in action would be highly educational. We could finally put to rest any lingering questions about their supposed capabilities. Zixtal's crystalline form pulsed with light patterns that indicated agreement. Yes, let's see these legendary Earth insects demonstrate their remarkable survival skills. I'm particularly interested in observing their supposedly sophisticated defensive mechanisms. Quelline projected her thoughts with the mental equivalent of a smirk. A practical demonstration would be perfect. We could document their behavioral patterns for future study, assuming there's enough cognitive activity to warrant documentation. Professor Kethvar considered the proposal with the careful deliberation that had made him one of the galaxy's most respected xenobiologists. The pedagogical value was undeniable. Nothing taught students about biological hierarchies quite like direct observation of inferior species, and the university's reputation for thorough scientific investigation would only be enhanced by such a comprehensive examination of Earth's insect population. "Very well," he announced, his tentacles assuming the configuration that indicated official academic decision-making. "I approve a practical demonstration of Earth insect capabilities. Mr. Chen, you have one standard galactic week to arrange appropriate specimens for classroom observation." The next week passed with the kind of anticipation typically reserved for major sporting events or the heat death of the universe. Word of the upcoming demonstration spread throughout the university with the efficiency of gossip in a telepathic species dormitory. Students from other departments began requesting permission to observe the spectacle, and several faculty members cleared their schedules to witness what was being described as the most entertaining educational event in recent academic history. Malik spent the week making careful preparations, consulting with Earth's biological databases through quantum-encrypted communications, and arranging for the transport of what he described as representative specimens of his homeworld's insect population. His classmates, meanwhile, entertained themselves by placing bets on how quickly Earth's insects would demonstrate their evolutionary inadequacy. The day of the demonstration arrived with all the fanfare of a minor academic holiday. The university's largest lecture hall was packed with students, faculty, and distinguished visitors who had come to witness the systematic debunking of any remaining myths about Earth's biological significance. Holographic recording equipment hummed quietly in the background, ready to document the proceedings for posterity and future educational use. Malik stood at the front of the lecture hall, flanked by a series of carefully sealed terrariums that contained his imported specimens. The containers were made from the finest transparent aluminum, their environmental controls calibrated to maintain Earth-standard atmospheric conditions. To the assembled alien intelligences, they looked like elaborate display cases for cosmic trinkets. "Before we begin," Malik announced, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustic enhancement systems, "I want to thank everyone for their interest in Earth's insect population. I think you'll find today's demonstration educational." Professor Kethvar settled into his position at the side of the stage, his tentacles arranged in the configuration that indicated professorial approval. "Mr. Chen, please proceed with your presentation. We're all eager to observe these remarkable creatures in action." Malik activated the first terrarium, its transparent walls revealing what appeared to be a collection of small, unremarkable insects, crawling across a miniature landscape. To the alien observers, they looked exactly as advertised: tiny, simple creatures with no obvious special characteristics. "These are carpenter ants," Malik explained, his tone carrying the neutral professionalism of a museum guide. "They're considered one of Earth's more common insect species, found on every continent except Antarctica. Their primary notable feature is their ability to work cooperatively in large groups." Zixtal's crystalline form shimmered with barely contained amusement. "Cooperative behavior? How quaint. I suppose for creatures with such limited individual capabilities, group effort might be their only survival strategy." "Indeed," Quillin projected, her telepathic voice dripping with condescension. "Their collective intelligence probably approaches that of a single moderately sophisticated alien individual." Malik nodded thoughtfully and moved to the second terrarium. "These are paper wasps. They're notable for their architectural abilities and their social organization. Each colony can contain several hundred individuals working together to maintain their nest." Roxef's armor plates rattled with what passed for laughter among his species. "Social organization? They're insects, not civilizations. I doubt their architecture would impress anyone who's seen real construction." The alien audience chittered, harmonized, and electromagnetically fluctuated their agreement. The demonstration was proceeding exactly as expected, with Earth's insects revealing themselves to be as unremarkable as everyone had predicted. "Now," Malik continued, his voice taking on a slightly different tone, "I'd like to show you something that represents one of Earth's more specialized insect species." He activated the third terrarium, revealing what appeared to be a single, relatively small, ant wandering across a bed of leaves. Compared to the previous specimens, this one looked almost laughably insignificant, barely 2 centimeters long, with a simple black coloration and no obvious distinguishing features. "This is a bullet ant," Malik announced, his words falling into the sudden silence that had settled over the lecture hall. "They're found in the rainforests of Central and South America. They're called bullet ants because of their distinctive defensive mechanism." The alien audience leaned forward with interest, finally something that sounded like it might have at least some rudimentary survival capability. "What sort of defensive mechanism?" Professor Kethvar inquired, his tentacles curling with academic curiosity. "The likes of whom?" Malik replied simply. The lecture hall erupted in the kind of laughter that could probably be heard in the next star system. Zixtal's crystalline form was practically blazing with amusement, while Quilline's telepathic mirth created feedback loops that made several sensitive species hold their heads in pain. "The sting," Groxeth managed to say between armor-rattling guffaws. "Ha! That's their great defensive mechanism? A tiny little sting from a tiny little insect?" "How adorable," Zixtal chimed in, her voice carrying the particular tone of someone who had just heard the most amusing joke in galactic history. "A creature so small it could fit in my geometric palm, and its big scary defense is a sting that probably feels like a gentle tickle." Quellen projected her thoughts with the mental equivalent of tears of laughter. "Oh, this is precious. Earth's mighty insects defend themselves with what amounts to a biological pinprick. How terrifying." Malik waited for the laughter to die down before continuing, his expression remaining carefully neutral. "Would anyone like to volunteer for a practical demonstration of this defensive mechanism?" The request sent another wave of hilarity through the assembled academics. The idea that anyone would need to be careful around such an obviously harmless creature was apparently the funniest thing they had heard since the last time someone had suggested that Earth might have something valuable to contribute to galactic civilization. Groxeth rose from his seat, his armored form towering over the other students like a walking fortress. "I volunteer to demonstrate the fearsome power of Earth's bullet ant. My species' natural armor should provide adequate protection against such a devastating attack." More laughter rippled through the hall as Groxeth made his way to the front of the room. Thugnarians were renowned throughout the galaxy for their incredible durability. Their homeworld's extreme conditions had produced beings who could survive direct exposure to radiation levels that would sterilize most planets. The idea that a tiny Earth insect could pose any threat to such a creature was beyond absurd. "Are you certain about this?" Malik asked, his voice carrying a note of what sounded almost like concern. "Bullet ants are called that for a reason." Groxeth's response was the Thugnarian equivalent of a belly laugh. "Mr. Chen, I appreciate your concern for my well-being, but I think I can handle whatever this tiny creature can dish out. My species has survived plasma storms, radioactive meteor showers, and gravity fluctuations that would crush most biological forms. I doubt one small insect will present any significant challenge." The other students cheered their encouragement, eager to see their classmate demonstrate the vast superiority of advanced alien physiology over Earth's primitive biology. Professor Kethvar positioned himself to get the best view of the proceedings, his tentacles already arranging themselves in the configuration he used when observing particularly interesting scientific phenomena. Malik carefully opened the terrarium containing the bullet ant, using a pair of specialized tools to gently encourage the insect onto a small platform. The ant, seemingly oblivious to the audience of alien intelligences watching its every move, continued its meandering exploration of its new environment. "Just to be absolutely clear," Malik said, his voice carrying across the silent lecture hall, "you want to demonstrate that this insect's defensive mechanism is harmless by allowing it to sting you?" "Precisely," Groxeth confirmed, extending one of his armored appendages toward the tiny creature. "Let's show everyone exactly how dangerous Earth's insects really are." The bullet ant, apparently deciding that the large alien appendage invading its space represented some kind of threat, did what millions of years of evolution had programmed it to do. It stung. For a moment, nothing happened. Groxeth stood motionless, his armor gleaming under the lecture hall's lighting, while the tiny ant crawled away from the point of contact. The alien audience held their breath, waiting for the inevitable anticlimax. Then Groxeth screamed. It wasn't the dignified expression of mild discomfort that everyone had expected. It was a sound that seemed to come from the very core of his being. A howl of pure agony that made the lecture hall's acoustic enhancement systems overload and shut down in self-defense. His armored form, which had withstood the hostile environment of his homeworld for decades, began to shake uncontrollably. "Interesting," Malik observed, his voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. The bullet ant's sting is considered one of the most painful experiences in Earth's biological catalogue. On the Schmidt Pain Index, it ranks as a level 4, which is described as pure, intense, brilliant pain, like walking over flaming charcoal with a 3-inch nail embedded in your heel. Groxeth's screaming had devolved into a series of sounds that no Thugnerian vocal apparatus should have been capable of producing. His armored form, designed to withstand the most extreme conditions the galaxy could offer, was writhing on the floor in apparent agony from the sting of a creature that weighed less than a paperclip. The alien audience sat in stunned silence, their various forms of communication temporarily suspended by the sheer impossibility of what they were witnessing. Zixtal's crystalline body had stopped refracting light entirely, while Quelline's telepathic abilities seemed to have shut down from pure shock. "The pain typically lasts for 12 to 24 hours, Malik continued conversationally, as if he were discussing the weather rather than the complete breakdown of one of the galaxy's most durable species. Earth's indigenous peoples have traditionally used bullet ant stings as part of warrior initiation ceremonies. They weave the ants into gloves and require young men to wear them for 10 minutes without crying out." Professor Kethvar's tentacles had frozen in the configuration typically associated with profound academic confusion. "Mr. Chen, are you suggesting that humans routinely expose themselves to this level of pain as a cultural practice?" "Only in certain regions," Malik replied helpfully. "Most humans prefer to avoid bullet ants entirely. We've learned to respect creatures that can cause that level of discomfort." The sound of approaching medical personnel echoed through the lecture hall, as Groxeth's continued screaming had triggered the university's emergency response systems. A team of alien medics burst through the doors, their various forms of advanced medical equipment at the ready to deal with whatever catastrophe had befallen one of their students. "What happened here?" demanded the lead medic, a crystalline whose form was specifically adapted for emergency medical situations. "Practical demonstration of Earth insect defensive capabilities," Malik explained, gesturing toward the tiny ant that was still crawling peacefully around its platform. "Groxeth volunteered to test the effects of a bullet ant sting." The medical team froze, their various sensors and diagnostic equipment suddenly focused on the small insect with the kind of intensity typically reserved for armed thermonuclear devices. "You allowed a student to be stung by a bullet ant?" The lead medic's voice carried overtones of disbelief that transcended species barriers. "Do you have any idea what kind of neurological cascade that triggers? We're going to need to put him in a medical coma for the next week just to manage the pain responses." As the medical team worked to stabilize Groxeth, who was still producing sounds that were probably traumatizing nearby telepathic species, the rest of the alien audience began to process what they had just witnessed. The tiny, insignificant creature that they had been mocking for the past week had just single-handedly incapacitated one of the most physically resilient beings in the known galaxy. "This is impossible," Zixtal whispered, her crystalline form flickering with patterns that indicated profound cognitive dissonance. "How can something so small produce such a devastating effect?" Quelliel's telepathic abilities were slowly coming back online, but her mental voice was uncharacteristically subdued. "I'm detecting massive neurological trauma from a single insect sting. The pain signals are so intense they're overwhelming my psychic defenses from across the room." Malik nodded sympathetically. Bullet ant venom contains a neurotoxin called ponratoxin. It's specifically designed to cause maximum pain without causing death, which makes it an extremely effective deterrent against potential predators. Earth's insects have had hundreds of millions of years to perfect their defensive mechanisms through natural selection. Professor Kethvar's tentacles were now arranged in what could only be described as the academic equivalent of shell shock. Mr. Chen, are you telling us that Earth's insects regularly produce compounds that can incapacitate advanced alien physiology? Well, that's just one example, Malik replied, moving toward another terrarium. Would you like to see some of the others? The lecture hall, which had been packed with eager alien students minutes earlier, was now emptying with the kind of speed typically associated with emergency evacuations. Zixtal, Quelline, and the remaining students were backing toward the exits with the careful movements of beings who had suddenly realized they were sharing space with something far more dangerous than they had initially calculated. Actually, Zixtal said, her voice carrying undertones of species-wide terror, I think we've learned quite enough about Earth's insects for one day. Are you sure? Malik asked, his hand hovering over the activation switch for another terrarium. I brought some carpenter ants, paper wasps, and a few army ants. Oh, and there's a murder hornet that I thought might be interesting to demonstrate. The remaining aliens in the lecture hall achieved a new galactic record for synchronized evacuation. Even Professor Kethvar, despite his academic dedication to scientific inquiry, found himself backing toward the exit with the careful movements of someone who had just realized he was standing in a room with several containers full of biological weapons. Perhaps, he suggested, his tentacles writhing with what his species considered diplomatic retreat, we should postpone the rest of the demonstration until we can arrange for proper safety protocols. Safety protocols? Malik asked innocently. Professor, these are just insects. According to our previous discussions, they're simple, harmless creatures with no notable defensive capabilities. The irony was not lost on anyone present, least of all the alien students, who had spent the previous week explaining exactly how primitive and insignificant Earth's insects were. The same creatures they had dismissed as biological accidents had just sent one of the galaxy's most durable species to the intensive care unit. Word of the demonstration spread through the university with the kind of efficiency that only truly spectacular academic disasters could achieve. Within hours, the entire student body knew that Earth's supposedly harmless insects had managed to accomplish what the most advanced alien military technologies had failed to do, completely incapacitate a Thugnarian through a single defensive action. The university's medical bay, which typically dealt with the occasional study injury or exotic disease exposure, found itself completely unprepared for the neurological effects of Earth insect venom on alien physiology. Emergency consultations with Earth's medical databases revealed that humans had developed an entire field of medicine dedicated to dealing with various insect stings, bites, and other defensive mechanisms. Grok Seth remained in a medically induced coma for 6 days, while the medical team worked to counteract the effects of ponratoxin on his nervous system. When he finally regained consciousness, his first words were reportedly an apology to Malik for underestimating Earth's biological capabilities, followed by a request for reassurance that no more insects were present in his immediate vicinity. The incident prompted an immediate review of the university's curriculum regarding Earth's biology. The planet that had previously been dismissed as an evolutionary backwater was suddenly reclassified as a high-risk biological environment, whose species required extreme caution when studied. The Xenobiology department added a new course specifically dedicated to Earth's defensive biological mechanisms, with Malik serving as a guest lecturer. Professor Kethvar, whose academic reputation had survived worse disasters, found himself in the uncomfortable position of having to revise several decades' worth of research conclusions. His paper on evolutionary mediocrity in primitive planetary ecosystems was quietly withdrawn from publication, replaced by a new study titled Reassessing Biological Threat Assessment in Supposedly Primitive Species. The other students from the original demonstration each developed their own unique relationships with Earth's insects. Zixtol began a detailed study of biomimetic applications for Earth insect defensive mechanisms, hoping to incorporate ponotoxin-based security systems into Vorthan crystalline technology. Quellanine started researching the neurological effects of Earth insect venoms, fascinated by their ability to overwhelm even telepathically enhanced nervous systems. Malik, meanwhile, found himself in the unusual position of being the most popular student in the university. His classmates, who had previously treated him with the polite condescension reserved for representatives of primitive species, now approached him with the careful respect typically shown to someone who had casual access to biological weapons of mass destruction. The university's policy regarding Earth specimens was completely rewritten, with new safety protocols that treated even the smallest Earth insects as potentially dangerous biological agents. Special containment facilities were constructed, and all future demonstrations of Earth biology required approval from the university's newly created Department of Xenobiological Hazard Assessment. The incident also prompted a galaxy-wide reassessment of Earth's position in the interstellar community. A planet whose insects could incapacitate advanced alien species was clearly operating under different evolutionary pressures than anyone had previously understood. Earth's application for full membership in the Galactic Federation was fast-tracked, with a special notation that their planet's biological diversity represented a unique strategic resource that warranted careful study and considerable respect. As the academic year drew to a close, Malik found himself reflecting on the strange chain of events that had transformed his species from galactic joke to galactic concern. The same evolutionary pressures that had produced humans had also produced bullet ants, murder hornets, and thousands of other species that had spent millions of years perfecting the art of biological warfare. The final irony was not lost on him. His classmates had been absolutely correct in their assessment of Earth's insects. They were indeed the products of an unusual evolutionary environment, shaped by intense competition and constant threat. What the aliens had failed to understand was that unusual did not necessarily mean inferior. In the end, the greatest lesson of the bullet ant incident was not about the power of Earth's insects, but about the danger of academic arrogance. The galaxy's most prestigious educational institution had been humbled by a creature that weighed less than a gram, simply because they had been too intellectually superior to consider that their assumptions might be wrong. The Zephyrian University of Xenobiology continued to stand as a monument to advanced learning, its crystalline spires still reaching toward distant stars. But now, in the basement of the Xenobiology building, behind multiple layers of security and warning signs in 17 different languages, sat a collection of small terrariums containing some of the most feared creatures in the known galaxy. Earth's insects had finally received the academic respect they deserved, even if it had taken a medical emergency to achieve it. And somewhere in the university's medical bay, a small placard had been installed with a simple message that served as a reminder to future generations of students. Assumption is the mother of all academic disasters. Please respect all biological specimens, regardless of their apparent size or significance. The bullet ant, blissfully unaware of its newfound reputation as a galactic terror, continued its peaceful existence in its terrarium, occasionally stinging the feeding apparatus when it felt threatened, and generally conducting itself with the same magnificent indifference to academic opinion that had served its species well for millions of years. After all, evolution had never particularly cared about anyone's academic credentials.